Hello, everyone. I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. Moth Boy Part 1. I've been reluctant to do this for many years. Friends and family have asked me to tell them about the Moth Boy for years, but I've declined. Perhaps they think I just have a creepy anecdote or a fun factoid. Not a lot of people know I've been there since the beginning. For reasons that will become apparent, I've been motivated to look closer at my experience with this person. Moth Boy, a stupid nickname, funny even, like a sidekick to an insectoid superhero. But I think we need to start at the very beginning. The year was 2004. I was part of an investigation, a missing babysitter at a foster home. It was peculiar but not necessarily sinister. We'd had some calls about that home in the past, but it was mostly just kids being kids. Neighbors complaining about noise and the occasional broken window. This was different. The foster home sheltered 6 kids from troubled backgrounds. The parents had to leave town for a family emergency and had paid for a pair of babysitters to help in the meantime. These weren't just any babysitters either. They were friends of the family and well known to the children. Familiar faces. Let's call her Vicky. Vicky had arrived at the house Thursday afternoon. She was to stay there until Sunday when the other sitter would come by. Vicky was there to help with cooking, cleaning, keeping an eye on the kids, and making sure the older ones got to school okay. But when the other sitter arrived on Sunday, she found Vicky's car still in the driveway, and the kids had been on their own since late Friday. We were immediately called in. This was not just about a missing person. There was a full home of kids involved. I have a background in child psychology. I was fresh out of college and had a penchant for westerns. I wanted to be the white hat who rode into town and cleared things up, being a shoulder to lean on and a hand to hold when the going gets tough. That wasn't quite my job description, but what we do and what we want to do are rarely the same thing. By the time I got to the Wheeler foster home, the place was packed with cars. The foster parents had come back just a couple of hours earlier, and it was full pandemonium inside. Some kids weren't emotionally ready to be interviewed yet, and others didn't know what was going on. Some of them had enjoyed being unsupervised. I could tell from one of the broken windows and the hockey puck on the driveway. Police were searching the area, interviewing neighbors, knocking on doors for witness testimonies, whatever they had to do to find this girl. But the key to the puzzle were the kids themselves. Someone must have seen something. It was clear that she'd been there, so where did she go? When? There were 3 boys and 3 girls. The oldest was 14, the youngest was 7. It was a nice place. A 2-story house with plenty of space. 2 rooms on the top floor for the kids where they bunked up 3 by 3. A large living room on the bottom floor with double glass doors leading to a backyard. There was a trampoline and a deflated outdoor pool waiting to be put away. A well-used ashtray on a white plastic garden table next to a grimy grill. Lighter fluid out in the open. There were 2 smaller television sets in 2 of the kids' rooms, an Xbox for the boys, a GameCube for the girls, both accompanied by well-worn and Cheeto-stained beanbags. It looked cozy, the kind of thing you'd have to pry a kid away from with bribes and promises. The place was a mess, but not a neglectful one. It was the kind of mess that shows life. As I was walking through the boys' room, I noticed a pitter-patter on the window. Looking a little closer, I saw moths. Not big ones like the ones with eyes on the wings. No, these were smaller, 1, maybe 1.5 inch at most. You noticed them too? One of my colleagues, Officer Norton. Found a couple in every room, he continued. They're not native to the area. Probably snuck along in a suitcase. Or maybe they just attract that kind of attention. It was an unusual detail. Spongy moths, an invasive species. The Wheelers would probably have to get the exterminators. It was pretty serious. But invasive critters aside, there wasn't much to say for Vicky's disappearance, at least not at first glance. There was no sign of a struggle, and the kids had managed fine without her. They'd cleaned out the snack shelf and eaten 2 full boxes of ice cream sandwiches, but apart from a stomachache, they'd be fine. I would begin my interviews later that day, all under supervision and with the foster parents in the next room, of course. I would try to build some rapport with the children, mentioning how I noticed their games and telling them of some of my own. I asked about their favorite shows, how they were doing in school, and what their favorite things to do around the house was. All little talking points to put things in perspective. It was all preliminary. Most of them were fine talking to me, happy even. There was this younger girl, Hayden, who blasted off into this long rant about her friends at school and the many things she wanted to do when she grew up. It's like she just needed an excuse and she was off to the races. Others, like 7-year-old Brandon, found the whole thing unpleasant. He couldn't bring himself to speak, but after a couple of bribes and some time to warm up, he confided in me. "I think Herman did it," he said. "Herman's a weird one. Herman. That's the name people see in the papers, not Mothboy. Herman." 10-year-old Herman was the newest member of the Wheeler foster home, having been there only half a year. The first time I saw him, he was sitting in the corner of the living room, lodged between a TV bench and a bookshelf. If you didn't know where to look, you'd barely notice him. He was quite large in stature for a kid his age. He had this sandy blonde hair with gray eyes. I could see them all the way across the room. He had this expression of a cat on the prowl, with eyes wide open and pupils wide. He was just sitting there, staring ahead, as another moth tapped on the window to my right. "Hey there, Herman," I said, walking up to him. "You mind talking to me for a bit?" I held out a hand and introduced myself. Herman shook it, and I felt this intense warmth, then movement, a twitch. I pulled back only to see he'd put a caterpillar in my hand. The thing had these cactus-like spikes digging into my skin as it rolled back and forth. My hand flared up like I'd been stung by a wasp. I dropped the caterpillar and crushed it. Herman didn't seem to mind. His expression didn't change. I tried to have a conversation with him, but he didn't respond. It was only later that evening that I learned from one of the older girls that Herman didn't speak. Not just as in he spoke quietly. He never spoke at all. I asked his foster parents about it, and they mentioned him being an unusual case. "We don't know what happened before he came to us," they explained. "They just found him. I don't know where my instincts come from, but I felt something. We weren't going to find Vicky with a thorough search or a surprise witness at the 11th hour. No, we had an answer in Herman. I don't know why, but something was telling me that behind those gray doll-like eyes was an answer. I remember leaving the Wheeler home with a strange gut feeling. It was like an anxious stone in the pit of my stomach. Like I'd seen something awful, but my mind was playing catch-up with my eyes. I saw Herman in the window of the second floor looking my way, and even from a distance I could see 3 moths fluttering around him. I waved goodbye, but he didn't wave back. I think it was Officer Norton who first characterized him as Mothboy. He said something akin to, "We talked to every kid in there and got nothing." Well, not Mothboy, we didn't talk to him. Herman was suspected to be the cause of the moth infestation in the Wheeler home. They'd begun to show up around the time of his arrival, and they were apparently very common around spaces where he spent the most time, hence the Mothboy moniker. It caught on. Even after one visit to the Wheeler home, I'd start to find larvae in my clothes. mostly my pockets. These little black segmented things waving their bodies back and forth like pool noodles. I dropped everything I wore into the dryer just to make sure I got them all. But I still had chills for the rest of the night. Like I could feel them on my body, and looking at the swelling on my hand, I knew these things would be a problem if they made a foothold. Vicky was still missing. The search area was expanded with a particular focus on the nearby interstate. The current working theory was that she was either coaxed out of the house and kidnapped or left with someone willingly. There was no working theory as to what exactly would have made her do that. She had a boyfriend, but he was out looking for her just like everyone else. The next day, we took a more structured approach. I was part of a team of people who were interviewing the kids one by one in greater detail. I got the 3 boys, while one of my colleagues got the 3 girls. We tried to create a calming environment, using our most colorful rooms and a couple of toys and comics to make it all look a bit more friendly. First one I sat down with was 12-year-old Sal, Latin American kid with his head on a swivel. I could tell he didn't want to be there. His eyes kept rolling at me like a bobblehead. I asked him about Vicky, about when she went missing, what they did when they noticed she was gone, and he wasn't very receptive to the topic. "We played games," he said. "We had cold pizza and sandwiches." It wasn't until I mentioned the other boys that I saw a tinge of something uncertain in his face. He didn't have much to say about Brandon. More than that, he was cool. But talking about Herman was a whole other thing. Sal looked down when I mentioned him. He didn't roll his eyes or shrug the question off. "You have a good relationship with Herman?" I asked. "No," Sal said. "No one does." "Why do you say that?" "He's a freak." "What makes him a freak?" Sal leaned back and crossed his arms, and without looking up, he seemed to open a little. Sal had been with the Wheelers for 4 years. Ever since Herman showed up, things had changed. William, the father figure of the home, had started smoking. Julia, on the other hand, had started day drinking. "Not a lot," Sal clarified. "But you notice, it's the stress." Sal described Herman as creepy. He explained in detail how he'd notice Herman skulking around the house when people slept, or when he thought no one was looking. Herman would never eat at the dinner table, instead packing his food into a Tupperware box and running away. "And the bugs," Sal said, shaking his head. "They're gross, and they sting. I gotta vacuum my bed once a week. They changed mattress 3 times, but they keep coming back." Herman would never smile. He would never talk. "Have you seen anyone bully him?" I asked. "A lot of kids like that get bullied." "Once," Sal said. "I saw someone pushing him into a puddle, but they don't do that anymore." "Why not?" Sal shook his head, trying to find the words. "It was months ago. Herman hit him with a water balloon. There was blood in it." I wanted to ask, but I could tell there was more. Sal took a deep breath, looking up from the floor. He didn't want to talk anymore, at least not about Herman. Brandon had similar stories. Herman seemed to have no filter. They'd once seen him dangling a rattlesnake by the tail, playing with it. He would poke around little insect nests, hoping to attract venomous spiders. Even things like barbecue could be made creepy, as Herman would admire the sizzling meat, but not out of hunger. He just seemed to like the sound. One of few things that made him happy, it seemed. Very happy. "He spent 2 days with a branch once," Brandon said. "He took his shoelaces, wrapped them around it, and tugged, like he was practicing what? Strangling things." Before my interview with Herman, I looked up a couple of things from his file. His original family had abandoned him and changed their names. He had been found wandering the highway by patrolmen, and efforts to find his biological parents failed. No one came to claim him. Even the name Herman was a temporary placeholder that kinda stuck around. It was no more valid than his Mothboy nickname. Herman did go to school but was part of a special education program. He seemed to pay attention in class, but they couldn't get him to perform any tests or measurements. He wouldn't play, and he wouldn't respond when spoken to. They knew he could read and write, but it was hard to say at what level. He would usually draw. There were those suggesting he was on the autistic spectrum, but he didn't seem to respond negatively to sudden or changing stimuli. In fact, he rarely responded to anything at all. So before my interview, I prepared some paper and crayons. If Herman didn't talk, maybe he would draw. Herman arrived with little fanfare. His foster father waited outside having a cigarette. Herman sat down across from me, folded his hands, and looked at me from across the table. He paid no attention to the paper and crayons. Just as I was about to ask him a question, I noticed him rubbing his arms. "Are you cold?" I asked. He nodded. I fetched my jacket and wrapped it over him. He didn't smile, but he stopped moving. "Better?" Again, he nodded. I sat down across from him and pushed the stack of papers closer, along with the box of crayons. Now that I'd made it apparent that it was okay to use them, he immediately picked the red and black crayons. "I'd like to ask about your babysitter, Vicky," I said. "Do you know anything about where she went?" Herman didn't acknowledge the question. Instead, he looked at the paper, then back up at me. He made a motion like he wanted something to drink, and then used a crayon to show a straw. It wasn't much, but at least he was communicating. I returned with a glass of lemonade, with a straw. Herman put the crayons down and sipped the straw, looking me straight in the eye with every gulp, those gray, doll-like eyes. "When was the last time you saw Vicky?" I asked. "Do you remember what she was doing?" He nodded at me again, grabbing the black crayon. I thought he was about to draw something, but he wrote in all capital letters. "Very happy." "She was happy last time you saw her?" He shook his head, pointing to himself. "You were happy the last time you saw her." He nodded and added the word cooking to his paper. "So she was cooking." Herman nodded enthusiastically. "Then what happened?" He thought about it for a while. Then he added the words "went home." Curious. I didn't get much else from Herman, but from what I'd learned, Vicky had been cooking something and then went home. Of course, Herman couldn't know that. Maybe he misinterpreted her leaving for her going home, giving some leniency to the working theory of her disappearing along the interstate. I thought a lot about it as I drove home that night. There was still no word about Vicky and her whereabouts, but I shared my findings with the investigators. There wasn't much to share. The children had been too preoccupied with their own antics and games to consider what had happened. They weren't mean about it, but they'd been too busy to notice her absence until she was already gone. Now that she was missing, they all expressed concern about it. The girls had put on this friendship bracelet that Vicky helped them make. Some of the officers involved with the case talked at length about the strange moth boy of the Wheeler house. Not only were there plenty of rumors surrounding him, but they kept talking about him as if he was somehow responsible. He was a creepy kid. Of course, he had to be the source of trouble. That had to be it. "He's big for his age," one of the officers noted. "Wouldn't surprise me one bit. He ain't all there, that's for sure." I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I hadn't made up my mind yet. Coming home that night, I felt a strange warmth along my neck. The warmth turned to a searing heat, making me throw off my jacket, dropping it flat on my bathroom floor. I hadn't even closed the front door, and there they were, on the floor, spongy moth larvae. Not just a couple, but dozens, maybe hundreds. Shaking out the jacket, small balls of paper and chewed bread rolled out. Something Herman had rolled up and planted in the jacket lining. He'd poked a hole in the inner left pocket and dropped the balls in there, making them almost impossible to notice. That's why he asked for the jacket. Not because he was cold, but because he wanted to plant these. I spent 2 hours steam cleaning the bathroom. Exhausted, I sat down on my toilet only to spot 3 more larvae along the trim of the walls. I had scrubbed and steamed and scrubbed again, and yet there they were. Just a couple, but more than enough. It was long after 1 a.m. when I called it a night. I'd put the jacket into a plastic bag, taken it outside and burned it, and as I lay down to sleep, I kept waking up, imagining the pitter-patter of wings along the glass of my bedroom window. The investigation continued for a couple of days. There was a lead about a woman looking like Vicky being caught on a camera at a gas station, but it turned out to be a false positive. Being back to square one, things started to look dim. I managed to get some time with the foster parents, asking them about their experiences and suspicions. Turns out, Herman was the most immediate problem for the couple to tackle. They talked about how he'd bring them endless stress, and the constant cleaning needed to handle the moths was exhausting. I have no idea where they're coming from, the foster mother sighed. It's not the clothes, they're washed 3 times a week. The kids aren't dirty, they all shower daily. And yet every day something comes crawling out. The foster father had a different idea. He hides them, he said. Herman hides them, I'm telling you. We had a talk with the other babysitter. She ping-ponged between hysterical and cordial, making it hard to keep a coherent conversation. She painted this picture of Vicky as a promising young woman, someone making extra money to get a place of her own as she went to nursing school. Vicky seemed perfectly pleasant, and there was no reason for anyone to hurt her. Sadly, that just meant she was more likely to be a victim. The working theory was that her boyfriend had done something. Turns out he'd been lying about his whereabouts on Friday evening. Police were looking for him to bring him in for questioning, but he wasn't officially charged with any crimes. Yet. But there were signs that pointed in a very familiar direction. It was possible, but then someone would have noticed. Sure, the kids were all about games and staying up all night, but not Herman. He must have seen something. One late afternoon, I was writing up a summary for my supervisor. I had to wear some backup clothes as the rest was in the dryer back home. I had this uncomfortable, starchy shirt. It chafed in ways you don't expect it to. I was about to finish up for the day when I got a call on my office phone. I answered, introduced myself, and heard nothing. There was someone on the other end, but they didn't say anything. I was suddenly aware of my breathing, like I could feel the hot air brush against the receiver. "Is anyone there?" I asked. There was a huffing noise. I furrowed my brow and listened. I could hear voices in the background. Children. But there was something else. Paper? "Herman, is that you?" 2 taps, a crayon against paper. "Are you okay? Do you need something?" 2 taps. "Can you give the phone to an adult? We'll figure it out." 1 tap. "Do you need help? Should we send someone?" 2 taps. "All right, someone's coming, hang tight." 1 immediate tap. He didn't like that. "Not that," I clarified. "All right, you want me to come?" 2 taps, clear as day. I drove out there with 2 other officers. I didn't mind racking up some overtime, but I could feel my skin itching at the thought of spending time with Mothboy. It was like a Pavlovian response. I could feel something crawling across the hair on my arms, and I couldn't tell if it was the late summer breeze or something about to sting me. Just thinking about it put me on edge, making my legs shake like I'd had too much coffee. I arrived at the Wheeler house with a patrol vehicle. Officer Norton and his partner were my backup, staying a solid 5 steps behind with a practiced smile. The Wheelers were already up front, so was Herman with a backpack. "I'm so sorry," said Mama Wheeler. "We didn't notice him calling until he hung up." "That's fine," I smiled. "I'm glad he feels comfortable talking to me." The foster father rolled his eyes. Perhaps that's where Sal learned it. "Did you want to talk, Herman? Is that it?" Herman shook his head, holding up a paper. He'd scribbled the word walk. Walk the walk, not talk the talk, I said. You want to go somewhere? He nodded. The parents didn't seem to mind, but there was a definite worry on their faces. Perhaps they weren't used to Herman making a scene like this, or even communicating at all. I waved Herman over, but he shook his head. He knelt on the ground and dove in with his crayon. Seconds later, he showed me a muddy paper. The new word was rough but clear. Alone, Officer Norton kept a smile up, but I could tell he didn't like it. Mothboy was just a kid, but in some other way he wasn't. Herman and I made our way on our own, following a trail leading past a bike road. We moved between houses, tracing a path that only a kid could figure out. A bird's-eye route straight through a busy residential area. Herman kept his head down with steely-eyed determination. "Do you have something to show me?" I asked, stepping over a white picket fence. Herman nodded, pointing straight ahead. "Is it about Vicky?" He nodded again. Perhaps he knew who'd taken her, or a clue as to where she went. The thought struck me that I might have to come face to face with whoever was responsible. I had my service weapon, but I hadn't considered that I might have to use it. Then again, Herman was a weird kid. Maybe he just wanted to show me a cool stick or a treehouse. We finally made it to our destination, a 2-story house in a slightly nicer part of town. It was about a 20-minute walk, but it would have taken twice as long if we'd taken a less optimal path. Herman stopped and held up a hand, asking me to wait while he wrote something down. As he did, I looked over at the house. "Nice place," I said. "You know the owners?" Herman nodded, showing me his paper. It said check pool. He underlined it and pointed to the side of the house. Something in his demeanor had shifted, but it was hard to tell what. He wasn't scared or angry, not happy either. But there was a new eagerness there, something urgent. I followed his direction, taking point. It looked like the owners were out. There were no cars in the driveway. Late summer vacation, perhaps. We followed the side of the house, opening into a big backyard. A large wooden deck with a scattering of folded sun chairs. Intricately detailed garden bushes barely clinging to life with an automated sprinkler. In the back, a gazebo, overlooking a pool covered with a tarp. It had this tacky corporate sunflower logo in a clear sun-washed blue. There was a security camera facing the backyard. I had to take that into consideration. Maybe it had caught someone. I could tell something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. There was this cat across the yard that stared at us like it was about to attack. Perhaps it could feel the same tension that I did. But was it scared of me, or the infamous Mothboy? I looked back at Herman. He nodded, pointing to the pool and poking at the tarp. I pulled it back. I was hit by this thick, acrid smell, something so dense and instant that it felt like I'd swallowed a wad of charred hair. I reeled back, wheezing for air. The pool had been drained, leaving a hollow space of ceramic tiles. It almost looked like the water was still there, as the blue tint of the sunflower logo gave the light a watery twist. There was something at the deep end, something black. I could hear a strange noise coming from it, but I couldn't tell what it was. A droning hiss like a white noise machine buzzing. I moved to the side, looking down. I couldn't tell what it was, even now. Maybe I didn't want to understand. "What is this?" I asked. "How did you find it?" I looked up at Herman. He'd written 2 words. Vicky. Cooking. My heart sank through my stomach as I noticed the details. The curled fingers. Legs popped like overcooked sausages, and there, if you looked at just the right angle, a skull, locked in a mouth-wide scream. I could see the edge of her spine poking through her burned clothes. I yelled at Herman to move away and made my way down the pool ladder. I had my phone in my hand before I realized what I was doing. I had to get back up. I had to get back up now. My thoughts raced as my poor excuse for shoes almost lost me my footing on the slippery tiles. I called out for Officer Norton, trying to tell him the address. I knew the street, but the number wasn't making sense to me. The only number I could think of was 4, the number of teeth I could see sticking out from the charred remains. "We have a body," I repeated. "We have a body, and I don't know if—" A trickle, something wet. Rain? Couldn't be. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. Herman was standing at the edge of the pool. He was holding a bottle of lighter fluid. In his other hand, a Zippo lighter. The flame was lit. Even as I looked at him, he continued pouring. My eyes burned as the chemicals made their way up my nose. "Herman," I said, "what are you doing?" He dropped the bottle unceremoniously, reaching for his scrunched-up paper. Still holding the lighter, he tapped a word. "Cooking." "Are you gonna hurt me, Herman?" He nodded. "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "I thought we were friends." I tried to keep my words simple, but it felt wrong talking to him like that. This was no ordinary kid. You couldn't reason with him. He didn't listen the way others did, and he didn't care. Even looking at the charred remains of his babysitter, there was no visible reaction. He might as well have watched the clouds go by. "Herman," I said, "I need you to step back. Others are coming soon. I'm on the phone with them right now. This is very serious." But he didn't step back. He didn't put out his lighter. I could promise him a house swarming with police officers, and he wouldn't bat an eye. Because by the time they got there, he would have already won. I pulled out my gun. Never in 1,000 years had I thought I'd be pointing it at a kid, but I did. "Put it away now," I snapped. "Hey, do it!" The flame stayed lit, and he wasn't budging. He stretched his arm out, holding the lighter with 2 fingers like a dainty dame with a fine cup of tea. Safety was off. I could do it. One wrong pull of a muscle, and I'd be the man who shot a 10-year-old. "Last chance," I demanded. "Last chance, Herman!" My legs were shaking. I could feel a cramp coming on as my muscles tensed up. My mouth was wide open, sucking in air like a funnel. He dropped the lighter. My mind split in 2. In one world, I shot Herman in the head. In the other, I dove to forward catch the lighter before it hit the ground. They were both valid options, but something in the world pushed me towards the second reality. Perhaps in some other place, the outcome would have been different. I missed the lighter, but it didn't matter. It landed with the top down, closing itself with a click. For a couple of seconds, I just lay there next to the charred remains. My world was nothing but chemicals and coal. I couldn't get my body to stop shaking. I'd been the flick of a lighter from going up in flames. I brushed away an insect, then another one. It didn't take me long to realize that Vicky was infested with them. And there, around her neck, something burned but unmistakable. Shoelaces. I climbed out of the pool. Herman was just sitting on a sun chair with his papers, writing. The cat had made its way across the yard and curled up by his feet. I didn't even realize I was still holding my gun. I figured I could still do it if I wanted to. One pop and a lot of drama would be over. This wasn't just a kid, he was something else entirely. Something I'd only read about in solemn worst-case scenario profiles during training. Perhaps I'd be doing everyone a favor. Before I could say anything, Herman showed me another thing he'd written. Very happy. Of course he was. There were sirens in the distance, and he couldn't care less. "You killed her," he nodded. "Why?" He thought about it for a second. He turned to his papers, making a few practiced strokes. He gave the paper to me. A smiley face. No words this time. I escorted him to the front of the building to meet up with the officers. As we walked, I felt something. He was holding my hand. Not to plant a caterpillar in my palm, but because hands is what kids are supposed to do. They were supposed to hold people's hands when the going gets tough. That's what Moth Boy was working with. assumptions. I think that's the first moment I saw him for what he truly was, a pretender. Until the moment those flashing lights came around the corner, I contemplated pulling the trigger, like I had some cosmic option to end lifetimes of pain, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The aftermath was awful. There was the fallout of the family being informed, but also the devastation of the Wheeler foster home, not to mention the house where Vicky had been burned. Remember I mentioned Mothboy having been bullied once? Yeah, the kid who did that? It was his family house. They had to move. They couldn't stay in a house where someone had been burned. And yes, she'd been alive. There was a security camera overlooking the backyard. Herman had tricked Vicky there, showing her some text on a piece of paper. As they got to the edge of the pool, he held up a necklace with a shiny rock. Vicky had clapped her hands excitedly and turned around for him to put it on. As she did, he switched the necklace for his shoelaces. Then he struck. He did some real damage in those first few seconds. Herman is larger than most kids his age, and Vicky was smaller than the average adult woman. After a short struggle, she stumbled into the empty pool and Herman let her go. Using the lighter fluid from his foster father's grill and a Zippo lighter, the camera showed a sudden burst of light, and Herman just stood there, very happy. I didn't stay up to date with the court rulings that came after that. I heard he was locked away. I just wanted him out of my life. Thinking about him reminded me that I was the kind of person who'd shoot anyone to save myself. It put this stain on my mind, like I was the most selfish person in the world. I kept Herman's smiley face paper as a reminder. I don't know why. Maybe to torture myself. For weeks after last seeing him, I would still get these incessant moths fluttering around my apartment. They would stay there for a couple years until I moved to a new apartment. I think it took 2 full years before I finally got rid of them. I'd hoped that would be a turning point, making me forget the moth boy once and for all. And I guess for a while it worked. But it wouldn't last. Because much like his namesake, Herman was impossible to truly get rid of. Like midnight pitter-patter against my bedroom window. Moth Boy, Part 2. The year was 2012, 8 years after my initial run-in with the infamous Moth Boy. After having almost been set on fire, I was eager to start a new chapter in my life. I went to therapy, I made advancements in my career, and I got married to a wonderful woman. We had our reception on a cruise. I know, unusual, but we've always had a thing for the ocean. We met on a diving course. I was living the married life, trying to get adjusted to the schedule of our 1-year-old daughter, when I got a call about a peculiar case. 3 men had died in the custody of the state, prisoners. Now, prisoners get killed every day. That's a reality that most of us have sadly come to expect. But these 3 prisoners had died under unusual circumstances, and it all tied back to one recent change in order. The deaths started a couple of months prior when Mothboy was transferred to the prison. Of course, they didn't mention him as Mothboy in the paperwork. But his name stood out like a scar on the page. Herman had been stuck in the system so long that he'd turned 18, and now he was a proper prisoner. In a real jail, alongside murderers, robbers, and God knows what else. I considered applying for reassignment, but I was specifically requested by name. They figured my experience with him might give a more balanced view of what was going on. Besides, there was another investigator working another angle. Let's just call her Mrs. Short. She was under the strict opinion that this was a matter of failed rehabilitation, and that the state was responsible for Mothboy's behavior, arguing that he'd just been a child when he was shuffled back into the dark corners of the juvenile detention system. That's what settled this for me. Not that I wanted answers, but that there was someone who wanted to put Mothboy anywhere but in a maximum security prison. She wanted him in a mental hospital and to receive care. I wasn't buying it. I'd seen that dead-eyed kid cover me with a bottle of lighter fluid ready to burn me like a witch. I wasn't sure of much at that time and point in my career, but I knew for a fact that there was nothing good in that shell of a person. And if I had to argue my point, I was ready to do so. I set out on a Monday morning. I kept getting updates from my wife. Our daughter was a bit under the weather, and we were waiting for the pediatrician to get back to us. There was always something. Was she looking a little pale after eating that spoon of peanut butter? Was she breathing a little differently when she lay on this side as opposed to that side? I was always in this state of what-if flavored worry. I arrived to meet Mrs. Short at the jail. A stern-looking woman in her early 40s with an evil stepmother kind of look. Not the kind of woman you'd expect to be arguing for nurture and care. We shook hands and introduced ourselves. She didn't seem all that pleased. "I'm sorry that they dragged you out here," she said. "I suspect this will be a fairly conclusive investigation." "How so?" I asked. "The warden isn't particularly well enthused about prisoner rehabilitation," she said. "Now, I know that isn't your priority either, however—" "Excuse me?" We looked at one another for a moment as I blinked away half a dozen questions. I shook my head, clutching my hand in my pocket. "I've been working on rehab programs for close to 6 years," I clarified. "Youth rehabilitation, juvenile detention, and development. A program I designed is used in 38 different locations, so I do care about rehabilitation. I care very much. Except, of course, for this particular case." "Yes, Mrs. Short," I said. "Yes, I think a 10-year-old who strangles and burns their babysitter is ill-equipped to return to society. He's not 10 years old anymore. That just makes him more dangerous." She accompanied me, reluctantly. We checked in our personal items at the front desk. Pretty much everything but our shoes went into a box with a faded blue sunflower logo. I signed the sign-in sheet and continued down the hall to a small office space we were supposed to share. Bare concrete floors lined with white brick walls. The smell of chlorine and cheap soap. Raised voices in the distance. It was impossible to tell if they were happy or angry, but I could make an educated guess. Mrs. Short and I stepped into the office. It looked like a refurbished interrogation room, and the lack of air conditioning confirmed it. Small barred windows overlooking a sniper tower. A single desk with 2 opposing chairs. Mrs. Short had already set up a laptop, and there were a couple of folders spread out. There was a TV in the corner, hooked up to show surveillance footage. "We don't know if he's responsible for all 3 deaths," she explained, showing me a folder. "There are signs, but there is no definite proof, no witnesses." I flipped through the folder, raising an eyebrow. One of the men had been found with a spongy moth caterpillar stuffed in his mouth. "You think the caterpillar showed up on their own?" I asked. "I'm just saying there is a presumption of innocence," she smiled. "We ought not to draw conclusions." Another man had been found with several caterpillars in his mouth. The last victim had been riddled with them. Then there was Mothboy's file. Herman. He was just 18 years old, but had grown to a staggering 6 feet 8 inches. He still didn't speak a word, but had caused plenty of trouble over the years. Assault, mostly. A couple of thefts. One attempted escape. He had the same dead eyes, and there was a strange musculature to him. He had these intense neck muscles that made it look like an old Batman costume. "His calling card in every death," I said. "Asphyxiation, asphyxiation, asphyxiation." "Strangulation, to be specific," Mrs. Short corrected. "Yes, they were murdered, but there is no definite proof of his involvement. The caterpillars are pretty much everywhere. Check the wall linings. You'll find some." "Was it always like that? Are you blaming an insect infestation on a single inmate?" "Yes," I said. "This can't be a coincidence." "Again, no proof," she said. But yes, their arrival coincides with his. I was left to my own devices for most of the day. I juggled responding to text messages with checking surveillance footage. Mothboy was huge. He'd grown out this shoulder-length hair that looked like he'd showered in olive oil. There were a couple of tapes showing confrontations between him and other inmates, and I figured that was a good place to start. Mrs. Short interviewed a couple of guards in the meantime. Mothboy seemed to always be the target of something. Someone wanting to show that they're big and tough. Someone pushing him or trying to cut in line. And every single time it devolved into absolute chaos. Perhaps he was or wasn't responsible for 3 murders. But there were over 26 incident reports of violent behavior in the past 8 months. He spent almost half his time in isolation, but it didn't seem to deter him. There was this one video of a man walking up to Mothboy when he was playing checkers with another inmate. The man flipped the board. Mothboy stood up, showed his hand in the man's mouth, and proceeded to try and pull his tongue out. It took 4 guards to subdue him, and the man was sent to the infirmary with a bruised tongue and a broken jaw. There were similar cases. Someone trying to snatch his dessert only to get a fork shoved through his eardrum. Mothboy had taken a couple of hits every now and then, too. 3 stabbings, 2 broken fingers, 1 blow to the head that may have caused a concussion. Problem was, he never sought help. He would hide it until someone else reported it. By the end of the day, Mrs. Short came back with a stack of papers. She sat down across from me, organizing a stack of papers into a new folder. You could say a lot about her, but she wasn't sloppy. "You see it yet?" she asked. "And see what?" She rolled her eyes, but kept an honest smile. She pointed at one of the tapes, the one where he tried to pull a man's tongue out. "This one," she said. "You see it? Violent, yeah? No," she said. "The checkers game. He was playing with someone. Socializing. I'm not buying it," I said, shaking my head. "Not one bit." "Then perhaps I ought to book you an interview with Mr. Dewan tomorrow." I wasn't afraid to have my view challenged. From where I was standing, I saw a violent criminal protected by technicalities. If I wasn't ready to have my opinion challenged, it was worthless. So I agreed to see this mysterious Mr. Dewan. Coming home that night, my daughter was fine. No fever, no anything. I took first watch that night, relieving my wife who'd been with her all day. There was little to no fussing, but I couldn't help but to think back on that 10-year-old boy. The silent little Herman who wrote messages with crayons, the weird kid who'd been found walking along the highway. Are people like that born or created? Rocking my baby girl, I didn't know what answer I wanted. But if someone could be born evil, who was to say my girl wasn't? But if someone could be made evil, then that would mean they could be unmade, like Mrs. Short was suggesting. I didn't like it. I watched my daughter. Her eyes still had life in them. Joy, sadness, something. And I held her tight that night, hoping those eyes would never fade to a dead-eye stare. That she would never have to see moths as anything but creepy butterflies. I met with Mr. Dewan the next day. A man in his early 70s. He was sentenced to life for the double homicide of his brother and wife. He'd been in jail for close to 40 years, and his life had slowed to a crawl. He was calm, collected, well-spoken, and had long since accepted his role. He was respected among the staff, helped out all the newbies, and was the one person none of the gangs looked twice at. And apparently he was Mothboy's friend. Dewan sat across from me in the interrogation room. No chains or anything, there was no need. He was well-shaved and had a walnut tint to his dark eyes. There was an inherent sadness to his face, like his smile was being pulled into the ground. I introduced myself. We shook hands. I asked him about Herman. "They all call him Mothboy," he said, "all of them, even the guards." "Do you call him that?" I asked. "I don't call him much of anything," Dewan smiled. I just wave him over. We play games, trade books, that sort of thing. So you haven't been in a confrontation with him? No squabble, no pushing, nothing? No, nothing like that, he continued. The guy's a gentle giant if you get to know him. Always shares his snacks. Did you know he loves music boxes? He does? Yeah, Doan continued. I got one playing that, Elvis song. Can't Help Falling in Love. It's his favorite. You got any idea why? Doan looked at me with a shrug and shook his head. His eyes drifted away for a moment as he crossed his arms. I think he just likes to spin, the little crank. Or maybe it sounds funny, he's not a complicated guy. And he's not violent. Not to you. Never, Doan reiterated. Trust him with my life. Mrs. Short shared a couple of interviews with me. She'd transcribed them meticulously. It painted a broad picture of Mothboy and his time in prison. The people she'd talked to spoke about him as an instigator, as if he loved to provoke. He'd slip maggots into people's food or stare at them from across the yard. He would never take the first step, but he would look for buttons to press, anything to give him an excuse to defend himself in the most horrible way. But for some reason, this Doan guy flew completely under the radar. It had been months, and this was the only person not on Mothboy's radar. It'd be one thing if it was a serial killer, some kind of kindred spirit, but Doan was just a nice old man with a violent past. It doesn't add up, I admitted. I don't know what to make of this. Then maybe that's something to consider, Mrs. Short added. I'm not saying he should walk free, but I'm saying maybe there's something that can be fixed. I wasn't convinced, but I couldn't refuse what I was seeing. There was something I was missing, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I talked to my wife about it in broad strokes. She was microwaving a burrito and cooling her head with a bag of frozen peas while I fed the kid. Some people just have that one person they stick to, she said, like how captive tigers can be raised with golden retrievers. People aren't like that, I said. I mean, this kid, I shook my head, imagining that grainy footage of him shoving his hand into a man's mouth. There'd been no sound, but my mind filled in the blanks. I shuddered. He's not normal, I continued. People can do bad and sick things, but still be people. But I don't know about this one. Maybe you gotta look a little closer, she said, shoveling half a burrito into her mouth. Hungry hippo vibes aside, she made a good point. When I put my girl to bed that night, I thought about Mothboy again. His parents must have put him to bed at some point. Had they known back then what he would become? Was that why he was abandoned? And if push came to shove, could I do the same? Looking at my daughter, I knew I couldn't. No matter how dead those eyes turned, I couldn't look away. But something must have happened for him to be left like that. Or could he have killed them? He'd done it before. I put my girl down and backed out, only to hear her fuss and groan. I came back to check on her, seeing her wipe her tired little face with the full palm of her round hand. And a little maggot smeared across her face. Moths. I washed her off and changed every piece of fabric in her crib. I changed my clothes too, finding a handful more maggots. Spongy moth larvae, not old enough to be caterpillars yet. I was furious. If I'd ever considered his innocence or an effort for rehabilitation, it went out the window in that moment. I didn't care. God, he was disgusting, and it just seeped into every life he touched. 2 days later, Mrs. Short and I were stopped at the door of the prison. There'd been a fourth victim, and an investigation was in full swing. This time there was surveillance footage. We got to watch it while they put Mothboy back into isolation, and we were not to enter the main prison floor. The footage was grainy, but just the right angle. It had happened right outside the showers. A man was walking back, meeting Mothboy as they crossed paths. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they started fighting. Mothboy threw the first punch. The man took a blow to the side of the head, wobbled, and collapsed. Herman picked his head up, held it close against the wall, and kneed it. I'd never seen a head turn that shape before. The man was dead before his body could figure out what was going on. I could see blood pooling on the floor as Mothboy wrote something on the wall. Very happy. Before the guards could pry him away, he stuffed something into the man's mouth. I didn't have to look close to see what it was. I knew. We all knew. It had only been hours, less than a day. But I knew that message meant something. I've seen that before, I said. He wrote it to me once. When? Mrs. Short asked. Why? Long ago. Not a lot of things make him happy, I said, pointing at the screen. Except that. Blood? Killing? I'm not sure, I said. Both, neither. An uncomfortable thought crossed my mind. I turned to her, trying to find the right words. Does he know I'm here? I asked. Does he know about us, about our investigation? I think so, yeah, she said. I looked back at the screen as it flickered. Perhaps it was no accident that he chose those particular words. Perhaps he had something to say. Was he putting on a show? I talked to the warden. He wasn't enthused by my idea, but there was no better time to do this. An interview. Mothboy was in solitary, chained to a bed. It was as secure as can be. The warden didn't think there'd be much to gain from an interview, but he humored me. He'd been the one who called me there to begin with, after all. I was escorted through the prison. I could hear raised voices, and this time, they were definitely angry. Some people had lost a friend, others a brother in arms. It was a matter of gang loyalty and demands for retribution. Mothboy was in the crosshairs. Perhaps that's what he wanted. Targets. The more the merrier. More people for him to kill in self-defense. But chances were that he might be transferred to a different prison. This had crossed a line. Previous attempts had at least been subtle. I was taken to the solitary ward. It didn't look that different, except it had a green stripe across the walls. It was just 4 rooms, no windows. Just beds, a toilet, and a sink to wash your hands. Well kempt, but equally well used. The guard showed me a room in the far corner. He checked a slot in the door, slid the key in the lock, and clicked it open. He does anything he shouldn't, get out. Don't take risks with this one, he said. We clear? I nodded. Herman, the Mothboy. He was laying flat on a pillowless bed, chained and bound. They'd barely washed the blood off him. You could still see it on his legs. Even lying down, he was a giant. He looked my way, his eyes as dead and disinterested as ever. I sat down on the floor across from him as the door shut. He turned his head my way, not saying a word. 8 years later, and I could still see him as a little boy. If you didn't know him, you could mistake him for a man in his 30s. Life hadn't been kind to him. Hello, Herman, I said. It's been a while. He tapped his finger against the cuffs twice. Tap, tap. A yes. Do you remember me? Tap, tap. Yes, it was an unnecessary question. I could tell he remembered. It was like looking at a dog who'd bit you. It knew what I tasted like. I tried asking a couple of control questions. Yes, he remembered the Wheeler foster home where we'd met. He remembered the other children. And yes, he remembered Vicky, who he'd strangled and burned in a classmate's drained pool. And here he was, almost a decade later, still killing, just like I'd known he would. Did you kill this man for fun? I asked. 1 tap. Number, that surprised me. Was he a threat to you? Number, did someone ask you to? No answer. His hand hovered over the cuff, uncertain. Finally, he tapped once. Number, you wrote that you were very happy, I said. Did the killing make you happy? 1 tap. Number, was it me? I asked. Was it a message for me? And with that, a flicker of something in his eyes, like an old motor rumbling to life. 2 taps. Yes. Before I could ask him about it, I heard a commotion outside. The raised voices had grown louder. Someone was breaking something. The guard outside my door looked in, yelled something in a hurry, and rushed off, leaving me locked in a room with the moth boy. It must have been serious. I got up to see what was going on, but the door was locked and no one was coming to open. I couldn't see anything, just hear the angry voices in the distance. I looked back at Herman. His head was still turned my way. "Is this you?" I asked. "Did you do something?" 2 taps. He sat up as far as the constraints allowed, leaning a little against the wall. He was big, but he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Then he started to twist a little, not contort or bend, just shimmy. And with his hands behind his back, I heard a strange noise, a light metallic ping, the first tunes of a music box playing Can't Help Falling in Love. I banged on the door, hoping someone would open. The music played. Seconds later, it stopped with a clang. It was broken apart and something clicked. The chains fell from Herman's hands. He'd taken a particular piece of Doan's music box, one shaped in a way that could be used as a lockpick. He didn't hesitate to sit up and start working on the next lock, and the next. All the while, he looked at me, silently asking me if I was going to do something about it. I didn't have my service weapon. No one was opening the door. And by the time the last shackles fell from his feet, an alarm went off in the hallway. Something was happening outside, but the real crisis was happening in front of me. What was I supposed to do? Before long, he was free. He and I locked in a room, and he was holding a sharp piece of metal. "You want to hurt me?" I asked. "Is that it?" This time he snapped his fingers. 2 snaps. "Yes." "You gonna kill me?" I held my breath. He didn't respond. Instead, he flicked away the little music box crank like the tail end of a cigarette. "You're gonna kill me, aren't you?" He shrugged at me and snapped his finger once. A number. But he held his hand up to my face, his thumb ready for another snap. He could turn that no into a yes, but he didn't. He tried to push me, but I was faster. He followed up, swinging his arms out wide to grab me. I couldn't get away. He swept me up, turned me around, and threw me to the floor. Before I had a chance to react, I felt something tugging on my leg. He was taking my shoes. He untied my shoelaces and pulled them out, leaving my shoes on the floor. He twined them together into a makeshift rope and spun them around his hands. Something to strangle with, like he'd done as a kid. For a moment, he just stood there, looking down at me. It was the same as all those years ago, those dead eyes. He'd just killed a man. He wouldn't have any problems with killing another. He towered over me. I froze. Every option in my head was a dead end. It all came back to him. Maybe he regretted not killing me all those years ago. If he had, maybe he wouldn't be here. Maybe he was making up for lost time. There was something missing in him. This wasn't just a damaged kid who'd taken a wrong turn. There was something gone in those eyes. Something just as real as missing a hand or a foot. Something like a soul. He grabbed me. I tried to get out of his grip, but I couldn't. His fingers were like vices. I don't remember what I said. I swore and spat, writhing like an angry cat refusing a bath. But it was pointless. We were worlds apart. He could snap my neck without even trying, but he didn't. He didn't do anything. He just moved me out of the way, putting me on the bed. Then he turned his back on me, looking at the door. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It didn't make sense. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What is this?" No answer. "Are you escaping? Am I a hostage?" He looked back at me and shrugged. He brought his thumb up to his mouth, and with his back turned, I heard a pop. Then with a bloodied thumb, he drew a smiley face on the wall, same as he'd drawn with a crayon once. The angry voices had gathered outside the door by now. I could barely hear anything over the alarm, but I could make out the metallic rattling of keys. They were trying to get the door open. But when the door finally clicked, it wasn't guards on the other side, it was inmates. They thought he was unarmed. They saw the chains left on the floor, but they didn't see the shoelaces. Perhaps that's what gave them the courage to attack. When the first man swung at him, Mothboy swept his neck up, spun him around, and kicked the door shut. He fell flat backwards, laying on the ground on his back with the other inmate on top of him. He used the bolted-down bed as a brace, pushing out his legs to put his whole weight into holding the door closed a little longer. He strangled a man to death in front of me. I heard the cartilage break and saw the muscles go limp. It was fast, almost clinical. Mothboy didn't skip a beat, and now he had a shiv. He turned to me, and with a quick flick of the wrist, he stabbed me. I didn't even realize it until I saw the blood. It wasn't deep, but it hurt like a gunshot. A cut straight into the side of my rib, a surface-level cut about 2 inches long. Then he turned his back on me like nothing had happened. The door burst in as angry inmates flooded the cell. One of them got the shiv straight to the jugular. They had these sharpened toothbrushes and razor blades, whatever they could get their hands on. One of them had some kind of flaying knife made from bottle caps, but the room was too small for them all to come at once, and one-on-one they didn't stand a chance. Mothboy didn't care about the occasional cut. He didn't even flinch. 3 men dropped dead to the floor, and by the time the others realized what was going on, it was too late. He followed them into the hall, leaving the door wide open. He'd wanted to hurt me, just like he said, but I'd clearly missed something. I shuffled into the hallway, stepping over bodies. Some of them were still moving, their nerves shutting down with every missed breath. I watched as one man lagged behind the others. Mothboy got to him, and that would be the end of it. One strike to break a jaw, another to crack a neck. I held my wound shut, feeling the warmth pool out of me. And before he rounded a corner in the opposite direction, he looked back at me, a hand raised in a casual goodbye as his dead eyes turned to new horizons. The guards found me not long after, shoeless and bleeding. The whole ordeal had almost blown into a full prison riot. Apparently, they'd found old Doan's body in the pantry with his neck cut. This, in combination with the previous death, had caused some sort of dispute. It had escalated to a pseudo-riot. I was stitched up and sent for debriefing. I had a long talk with the warden, but I was just waiting for Mrs. Short to show her face again. I knew she'd have something to say. She met me in the nurse's office before I was sent off to the hospital for a proper checkup. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed a bit frazzled. "He killed him," I said. "Killed the old man just to get the music box. And with that, he got out of his chains." "To do what?" she asked. "Protect you from rioters?" "Protect? No," I spat. "He stabbed me. We have witnesses seeing a man storm the room with that particular shiv," she continued. "You saying Herman did this? Just to stab you once and then stop?" "Yes, that's exactly it." And that's when I understood. Mothboy had not just done this to mess with me. He'd done this to craft a narrative. That's all it was. It was one long story. He'd started killing months ago to show people what it looked like. Caterpillars showed into mouths. Everyone knew it was him. It was unspoken but clear as day. Then he'd killed Doan, but without leaving his calling card. No caterpillars. That would make the whole block riot as they accused one another of killing the beloved regular. Some would blame Mothboy, others would blame each other. Having killed 4 men and always stuffing their mouths full of caterpillars, Mothboy's calling card was obvious. He'd established it from day one, and those who suspected him would try to get to him as the rest of the cell block erupted into chaos. He'd taken the music box, possible even before he killed the man on the camera. Doan had been tucked away at the far end of the pantry so people wouldn't notice him until the chefs showed up for dinner service, which was right around the time I stepped in for the interview. The guards had thrown Mothboy into isolation without noticing the music box. It was small enough to fit into the palm of his hand. breaking off the little crank. He could pick the lock off his shackles. He took my shoelaces to protect himself with a familiar weapon, but I can't imagine that's the only reason he wanted me there. And then he'd stabbed me. Just a little. And now, as I looked at Mrs. Short, I could see why he did it. He'd made it look like I'd been attacked by another inmate, and he'd been the one to step in, like a guardian. And how good it looked. A gentle giant desperately breaking out of his chains to stand up for an old friend. He was protecting you, she said. I'm sure of it. He didn't, I said. He's using you. He's planning it. I've made my decision, she continued. You're here in an advisory capacity, and I thank you for your time. You don't understand. He's the fucking devil. He was just playing with us. It was a playground, and now she was going to put him into recovery, within arm's reach of vulnerable people. She was going to put the most sadistic, manipulative thing I'd ever met into a program where he could get away with anything. And the more I protested, the more her mind was made up. It was already settled. Please don't do this, I begged. Please don't do this. I'm sorry, she said. You're too close to this. It's done. It was chaos out there, screaming, slamming doors. If I closed my eyes, I could smell the blood, and I didn't know if it was coming from me or the hallway. I'd later find out that in total 9 people died that day. My wife would see me at the hospital. I'd be okay. The wound looked bad, and it'd leave a nasty scar, but it wasn't going to take any years off my life. But as I held my wife and felt the thumping of blood press against my stitches, I couldn't help but think of what was about to happen. Mrs. Short was going to put Herman, the moth boy, into some sort of recovery program. He would lie and cheat and plot. He would use every tool at his disposal, and he would get her to do what he wanted. He didn't care how long it took or how many people had to die. He just wanted to play his little games, and people would have to suffer for it. And maybe at the end of the day, that was the point. Maybe he just wanted the suffering. That night, as I put my daughter to bed, I kept thinking about his dead, soulless eyes. I could feel something cold creeping up my spine as I imagined my baby girl looking up at me with that same expression, silently asking me if I'd still love her if she was a monster. And I have to be honest. At that point, I didn't know if I could. Maybe I, too, would have left my child along the highway and disappeared. But she didn't look at me like that. She smiled, cooling my soul like a healing balm. I couldn't accept a world where someone like her could become someone like him. I just couldn't. Some monsters have to be born. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. I work night shift at a hospital. The closed wing keeps paging me. They tell you the night shift has a different gravity. The lights are lower, the halls feel longer, and sound travels in ways it doesn't during the day. You learn the language of machines, the sigh of a ventilator, the soft cough of an IV pump, the staccato alarm that means someone's heart just decided it's had enough. You also learn which noises to ignore. Hospitals make 1,000 harmless sounds in the dark. But there's one sound I was taught to ignore the first week, the overhead page to Wing C. Wing C is closed. If you walk the main corridor past the double fire doors, you'll hit a lit sign that still reads C Wing, but the doors themselves are chained from the inside with a thick brass padlock. Behind them is a dead hallway, a stretch of tile that used to lead to oncology. 5 years ago, there was a fire. No one died, but the whole unit was gutted with smoke and water damage. Administration decided it was cheaper to expand elsewhere than to renovate. Maintenance sealed it. Lights cut, vents capped. Off the map. And yet, sometimes around 2 or 3 in the morning, the overhead speakers will crackle and a female voice will say, "Dr. Rahman to Wing C, Doctor. Rahman, please report to Wing C." The veterans told me it was a glitch in the old paging system that nobody wanted to pay to fix. If you hear it, you didn't. My preceptor said, only half joking. Keep your head down and keep charting. I didn't think about it much my first month. Nights are a fog of meds, vitals, empty coffee cups. But 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday that felt like a Thursday and tasted like stale gum, I was covering observation beds when the speakers popped. Dr. Rahman to Wing C. 2 seconds later it repeated a little louder. Dr. Rahman, please report to Wing C. I looked up at the ceiling tile, then at the clock. 3:12 a.m. Old system burping, said Hadi, the tech at the station. He didn't even glance up from the monitor. Ignore it. We went back to charting. At 3:17, 5 minutes later, the page chimed again. Dr. Rahman, Wing C. Now the voice sounded wrong, warmer than the usual automated page, like a person leaning toward a mic. Hadi's fingers froze on the keyboard for a heartbeat, then resumed. He pretended not to hear. I wish I could say I did the same. The third time it came, something in me tightened. Not a big thing, just a knot under the ribs. I told myself I was curious, or maybe I wanted a walk to wake up. I told myself a lot of things as I stood and grabbed the master keys from the hook. I'm going to grab blankets from supply, I told Hadi. Cool, he said, still not looking. I didn't go to supply. The corridor to Wing C isn't far from observation. The hospital was built in phases, and you can feel the seams where one decade attaches to another. The floor, tiles shift color. The walls jump from modern antiseptic gray to older plaster painted a shade they probably once called soothing sage, and now looks like the undertone of a bruise. The C-wing doors look like they always do, chained and padlocked with a tag that read "Do not remove." Beyond them, only dark. I don't know what I expected. Voices, movement, something to make me laugh at myself and turn around. Instead, I got the smell. Hospitals have a smell. Even scrubbed clean, they keep a base note of disinfectant and human breath with hints of coffee and sadness. The air near the C doors was wrong. It was colder, and underneath the cold was a whisper of burned plastic. If you've ever left a cheap kettle on too long and caught it just before it died, you know the smell. Hot, faintly sweet, a little poisonous. I stood there a full minute listening. Nothing. Then I noticed the chain wasn't actually threaded through both handles. It was looped through the left handle and around a bar welded to the right. If you lifted the left handle hard enough, the chain would slacken just enough to slip an arm through. I didn't decide to try. My hand just moved. The handle was stiff, colder than the metal should have been. It squeaked when I pulled. The chain bowed. I slipped my arm through awkwardly and found the interior bar. It took 3 tries to catch it with my fingers and lift. The doors gave a little, enough to let me lean my shoulder in and slide. I know what you're thinking. Stupid. I've thought it too 100 times since. But at the time it felt inevitable, like the voluntary part of me had stepped aside to let something older do the walking. Inside, the dark had weight. I clicked on my penlight. The beam picked out dust like snow in a tunnel of air. The hallway past the doors felt abandoned in a way that clean spaces never can. There were outlines on the wall where signs used to be, squares a few shades lighter than the surrounding paint. A rolling chair with one wheel missing lay tipped on its side, the split plastic of the broken caster sharp as a snapped tooth. I told myself I'd go 20 steps and turn back. I took 21, then 22, then lost count. Dr. Rahman to Wing C. The page came again, but it sounded different in there. Like it wasn't coming from above me, but from ahead. The penlight shook in my hand. I kept walking. I passed the old nurse station. Someone had draped a dusty sheet over the counter, and the sheet had settled around the equipment like a frozen wave. I lifted a corner. Underneath was an intercom module with big square buttons, the kind you'd see in a school hallway 30 years ago. The PA switch had a crack across it, a lightning fork through faded plastic. The page came again. This time the speaker wasn't the ceiling, it was the intercom box. The tiny grill hissed, and that same woman's voice, not automated, human, came through soft as brushing your cheek. "Dr. Rahman, please." For a second, I wasn't on night shift in an empty wing. I was 8 years old, and my mother was calling my father's name from the kitchen, tired and trying not to sound it. The feeling hit hard and vanished. I backed away from the counter and nearly tripped over the corner of the sheet. The patient rooms in Wing C were square and small. My light found the numbers above the doors. C301, C302, C303. The third had scorch marks around the frame that weren't there on the others, little fingers of soot reaching out across the paint. My throat tightened. Stupid. I moved on. At C307 I stopped. The door was shut like the rest, but the call light above the frame, the flat plastic rectangle that glows when a patient hits their button, was on. It pulsed slowly, sickly yellow, the color of old teeth. I stood there, very still. Another hospital, another year, someone might have wired the system to test. But this wing wasn't wired to anything. The power feeds were cut. If you shoved a plug into an outlet in here, it would give you only silence. The light pulsed once, twice. I put my ear to the door. The wood was cool. I heard nothing from inside except my own breath, and beyond that, the building's heartbeat. Vents that weren't supposed to be running, something settling overhead, pipes you swear you can hear thinking. The handle turned when I tried it. The hinges creaked. The smell got thicker, burned plastic and something else, a medicinal sweetness like old cough syrup. The room was empty, no bed, no chair. The window was blacked out with plywood, the edges caulked. On the far wall, someone had drawn a square with a carpenter's pencil. 4 precise lines like they intended to cut into the drywall and then changed their mind. On the floor sat a call bell unit, the plastic casing yellowed with age. The cord snaked out under the door up to the light. Someone had hardwired it directly to the indicator. It shouldn't have been on. I crouched. The unit wasn't connected to power in any way I could see. The cord ran into the wall and ended. Still, the light above me pulsed like a slow breath. I thumbed the cancel on the bell. Nothing. "Dr. Rahman to Wing C." The voice came from behind me this time in the hall, as if whoever was paging had stepped into the corridor and was calling to me by my wrong name, asking me to be someone else. I left the room. I told myself I'd seen enough. Curiosity satisfied. At the nurse station, the intercom's little red transmit LED was lit. My hand hovered over the button marked RESET. I pressed it. The light went out. The intercom went quiet. My pen light framed a small label under the unit, written in old adhesive tape, the kind that turns brown at the edges. R. Rahman. I don't know why that felt like a punch. People leave labels. It means nothing. I turned away. That's when I heard the footsteps. They weren't the heavy thump of boots or the clack of heels. They were the flat, damp sound of bare feet, quick and close. They ran across tile somewhere to my right, then stopped. I spun the light. It found only dust and an overturned laundry cart. Something brushed my shoulder. Not air, not imagination. It had direction and weight, the way a child's hand has weight when it patters past your sleeve. I swung the light and saw a smear on the fabric of my scrub top, a brownish print the size of a small palm, as if someone had pressed their hand there and left a whisper of iodine. I walked out. I didn't run. My brain instructed my legs, walk, do not run, because running makes it real and your back is too open. I walked the same number of steps out that I had taken in or tried to. I reached the chain doors and shouldered through the gap, bumping the metal hard enough to bruise a rib. Back in the lit corridor, the hospital's normal smell hit like a wave of sanity. The burned plastic sweetness was gone. The overhead speakers were quiet. The clock read 3:36. At the station, Hadi glanced up. "Blankets?" he asked. "Didn't have any," I said. My voice was too thin. I cleared my throat. "I'll grab from third." He nodded and went back to the screen. I sat down with my charting and watched my hands not shake. I told myself I'd dreamt half of it. Lack of sleep puts cracks in you where weird things leak in. But the smear on my scrub top didn't dream. I tossed the shirt at home and tried not to think about it. The next 2 nights were uneventful. I let myself believe the old guys, PA system glitch, nerves, nothing more. Then Friday came. It was busy. We had a double admission at 1 a.m., then a combative withdrawal at 2:20. By the time I sat to breathe, it was 3:05. I took 1 sip of coffee that tasted like cigarette filters, and then the speaker cracked. Dr. Rahman to Wing C. The hair rose on my arms. I kept typing. Hadi didn't look up. The second page came, and then the third, spaced in 5s, like someone watching the clock. I held the keys for 20 minutes and didn't stand. And then patient Deeb in OB 6 hit his call bell with the insistence of a toddler with a new toy. He wanted to tell me the TV remote wasn't responding to channel up, only channel down. I replaced the batteries and told him to sleep. When I stepped back into the hallway, a second call light was glowing at the far end in the direction of C Wing. Not the sealed doors, the light above the small service door across from them that led to a linen closet. The indicator above it pulsed the same old teeth yellow as the one I'd seen in C307. The service door wasn't supposed to have a call light. It wasn't even on the same system. I stood there, coffee clawing its way up my throat, and watched it blink. I don't remember unlocking that door. I remember the closet smell, warm dust, the starch of folded sheets. There was a hatch in the back wall I'd never noticed, a rectangle cut into the drywall and screwed back in place. The screws looked fresh compared to the rest of the wall. Someone had put a strip of duct tape across one corner. On the tape, a word in black marker, "spare." I peeled the tape back and put my ear to the panel. From the other side came the faintest sound, like a radio in another room tuned between stations. Not talk, not music. The idea of voices. I closed the door carefully and locked it. The light above it went out. When I turned back toward the station, Hadi was watching me. His face had that carefully blank expression nurses use when someone's doing something they shouldn't, and you don't want to write it down later. "You hearing it?" he asked. "What?" "The page." I nodded. He let out a breath through his nose. "Used to be before the fire, Dr. Rahman was oncology night. He was good. He'd sit with people who were dying like he had nowhere else to be. After the fire, the first month we came back, the page would call him every night. Then less. Then just on some weeks. I don't know why it started up again." "What happened to him?" I asked. Hadi looked at the ceiling in a way that meant he truly didn't know. "Transferred? Retired? Everyone old enough to remember is either days or gone." The rest of that shift felt like the kind of dream where you keep trying to pack a bag but your hands won't pick up anything you need. I finished my charting by force and drove home as the sky went colorless behind the buildings. 2 nights later, I was off. I woke at 3:17 exactly, heart like a fish in my chest. The room smelled faintly like burned plastic. I got up, turned on all the lights, and told myself I was being dramatic. On my next stretch, the page came at 3:12, 3:17, 3:22. It was almost funny in its punctuality. I didn't go to Wing C. I cleaned 4 poles like a man scrubbing guilt. I let Hadi field the noise with his practiced ignoring. Then Mr. Deeb coded at 3:29. Real alarms screamed, real feet ran. We worked him for 6 minutes and bought him a heartbeat, A ragged, fragile thing, but it held. In the aftermath, as we gathered our chests back into our bodies, the overhead cracked. Dr. Rahman to Wing C. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the electric aftertaste of adrenaline, or the way the page cut through real life like a knife through the line that divides then from now. I took the keys. I didn't lie to Hadi. I said, "I'm going to see," and he said nothing and looked at his hands. The doors gave the same way they had before. The burned smell met me like a friend I didn't like. I went straight to C307. The light above the door was already on, pulsing. Inside, the square on the wall had changed. It wasn't pencil anymore. Someone had cut it. The drywall rectangle leaned against the baseboard. Beyond the hole was a space, 2 studs wide, dusty, the inside of a wall. My light sewed its little beam into the cavity and found wires, a dead roach, and at the bottom, a box. It was a small plastic case the size of a paperback, the kind they sell at electronics stores to keep components safe, with a cracked, smoky lid. Inside, a circuit board sat like a fossilized leaf. Printed across the board in ink that had run from heat were 2 words: Rahman Pager. I picked up the box and nearly dropped it. It was warm, hotter than it had any right to be, like it had been sitting in sunlight. I set it on the floor, pried the lid, and saw the board was wired to a battery pack grafted in with electrical tape. Old, improvised, wrong. Someone had built a device, shoved it into the wall, and left it to cook. And the intercom, reset or not, kept obeying it. That's when the monitor woke. Hospitals are full of screens. Even in a dead wing, there are terminals. Most won't boot without power. This one did somehow, though the plug drooped out of a socket that wasn't live. The screen flickered and spit a green cursor into a black field like a relic from a forgotten decade. Letters rolled across in a slow type no human could duplicate. Subject: R. Rahman. Status: already failed instructions. Erase memory. Start loop. My mouth went dry. I stepped back. My heel hit the corner of the hole and the drywall scraped my ankle. Something moved in the intercom behind me, a tiny rattle like a bead in a child's toy. "I'm not him," I said out loud, because the room had become a person you had to address. "I'm not." The words felt futile. The monitor didn't care. The cursor blinked twice and then new text slid in. New subject, son. Enter name. I turned to go. I made it to the hall. I made it 3 steps, 5, 9. Then the overhead speaker in the dead ceiling opened and whispered, not the woman's voice, but my own. Recorded, slightly tinny, but mine. Dr. Rahman to Wing C. I wish this is where I say I ran. I didn't. I stood there, dumb, and let the sound pass through me. It felt like standing in a doorway with a hand on both frames and realizing you're the door. I went back to the nurse station like I'd been underwater and finally found air again. Hadi looked up and paled. "You look like hell. There's a device in the wall, something built. It's paging itself." He shook his head. "Admin said they pulled all that after the fire. Admin says a lot. We didn't call anyone. Who would we call? Maintenance would shrug. Security would give us a form. The house supervisor would tell us to focus on patient care. So we did. For the rest of the night, no pages came. At 6 a.m., I went back to C307 to convince myself I'd overreacted. The hole was still there. The box wasn't. On the way out, at the intercom, I saw the old tape label again. R.RAHMAN. I peeled it back. Underneath, in smaller, faded handwriting, was a second label, almost erased by time. R. Rahman. Temp. The next day, I spent an hour in the basement records room. The clerk, a woman with glasses that magnified her eyes, let me browse the old staff rosters from the year of the fire. There was no doctor, Rahman in oncology. There was a Rahman, R, but not a physician. A night orderly. 6 months on the job. Terminated after the fire. Reason: workplace violation. When I asked what that meant, the clerk shrugged. Could be anything. Taking supplies home, sleeping on shift, something worse. We didn't digitize the details from that year. As I left, she called after me. We did have one doctor who used to sit nights with patients. He was a pediatrician who volunteered when he couldn't sleep. Not a Rahman, though. Different name. I drove home with the taste of burned plastic in my throat and the feeling that the building had a mouth and I had been talking into it. I wish I could tell you I quit. I pictured writing a tidy email and walking out into a life where nights are for sleeping and walls are just walls. I pictured that and then found myself clocking in again at dusk, as if the punch reader had a gravity I couldn't fight. The following shift, the pages started earlier. 2:57, 3:02, 3:07, every 5 minutes like a metronome. I didn't answer. Patients needed meds and encouragement and blankets and human things. I gave those and pretended the other need wasn't there. At 3:21, OB 6's monitor blared a false lead-off alarm. I silenced it, checked the wires, taped them down. When I stepped back into the hall, the lights flickered. Not a full stutter, just a blink long enough to take one image of the world and steal it. So when the light returned, you had to compare the two and decide what was missing. What was missing was my key ring. It had been clipped to my waistband. Now it wasn't. My left hip felt naked. I checked the floor, my pockets, the station, the bathroom. Nothing. Hadi raised his eyebrows. Sympathy plus we're so screwed. Without master keys, you are a body without hands. We retraced my steps, me with the suspicion taste of a stolen wallet rising. When we reached the hall by Wing C, the keys sat on the floor 3 inches inside the chain doors, as if someone had dropped them on the other side and nudged them into view with a toe. I looked at Hadi. He shook his head once, emphatic. I slid my arm through the gap. The keys were warm. I wish that was the end. It wasn't. You don't get an end with these things. You get a narrowing, a pressure, and if you're lucky, a place where you can stand with your back to something solid and keep breathing. Last night, the page came not at 5-minute intervals, but as a continuous whisper. It didn't say Dr. Rahman anymore. It said my name. Not the name on the schedule or the roster, the name my mother used when she wanted me to come home. The one I haven't heard in years except inside my own head. It called it soft, patient, as if it had all the time in the world, as if it could wait, as if it had been waiting since long before me and would keep waiting long after. I took the keys and went to Wing C and stood in front of C307 and didn't go in. The light above the door pulsed and I let it. I said quietly to the empty hall, I won't remember you. The intercom clicked. The old computer in the nurse station hummed, though no one had touched it. Somewhere in the walls, a battery warmed a circuit board and sent a signal into the dark. I took a marker from my pocket, the kind we use to label tubing, and wrote on the wall outside 307 at the level of my eye. If you see this, do not go in. Then I went back to the living. To the patients who ask for extra ice and the ones who need a hand to hold at 4 a.m. When the long thoughts come. When my shift ended and the sun did that pale trick it does at dawn, I walked out past the chain doors, past the sign that says Sea Wing, past the smell that might be in the air or just in my head. I walked into morning and the ordinary world and said my name out loud to hear it from a human tongue. When I came back tonight, the marker writing was gone. Not scrubbed, gone like no one had ever written anything there. The wall looked the way it did the day of the fire, if that makes sense, the paint holding its breath. So I'm writing this down here while I still remember. Because maybe that old screen wasn't talking to me. Maybe it was leaving a note the way you leave a nightlight on for your own return. Maybe the loop isn't a trap so much as a bargain the building made to keep something behind the walls from coming out. Give me a name and I will drop a page. Give me a name and I will keep them busy while the living sleep. Give me a name and I will erase it at dawn. If you work nights in a hospital and you hear a page to a wing that doesn't exist anymore, don't answer. If you do answer, don't go past the third door on the left. If you do go past it and you find a call light pulsing over a room with no bed and a hole where a square used to be, don't pick up the box, don't press the intercom button, don't read the screen. And if you hear a voice on the PA that sounds like your own, remember that buildings learn the language of the people inside them. If you tell them your name enough times, they will learn how to say it back. If I forget this tomorrow, someone reading will remember for me. That's the other trick of nights. The way strangers hold each other's stories up to the weak light like X-rays, seeing what's broken and what's missing and what's trying to heal. I'm going to finish my round now. The page just came again. It didn't call any name this time. It said softly, like a parent standing at a door that won't open, "Please." And whatever you do, if you ever hear that, don't answer. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into story 3. The Price of Brotherhood. My name's Chuck, and in the fall of 1996, I was an 18-year-old freshman at the University of Alabama, wide-eyed and desperate to fit in. I'd grown up a farm boy in a small town, the kind where everybody knows your business, and college was my shot at becoming the first in my family to make it out into the big bad world. I wanted to be somebody. When my mama first got sick, I remember always thinking I could get smart enough to cure her. That didn't pan out, but my sense of optimism didn't break apart because of it. I just tried to motivate myself even more. That's why I rushed Delta Kappa Epsilon, or DKE, the fraternity with the best parties, the best connections, and the kind of reputation that could open doors for someone like me. I didn't realize back then that some doors lead to places you can never come back from. During Rush, where groups of kids go house to house and sort of man-flirt their way into the right fit. I'd mentioned my dad was a Clemson alumni, so the brothers all took to calling me Stripes, both because Clemson's mascot was the tiger and also because a cowardly tiger shows his true stripes at some point. The two schools were pretty big football rivals. Pledging started out like I expected, me and the other pledges, 20 of us, all nervous and trying to act tough. Got dragged out of our dorms at 2 a.m. by brothers in ski masks. They loaded us into vans, blindfolded, and drove us to some backwoods field. The air smelled like pine needles and cheap beer, and when they ripped off our blindfolds, we were standing in a circle of tiki torches, the brothers screaming at us to chug warm natty light or do push-ups in the mud until our arms gave out. When one pledge puked, another pledge had to chug a mouthful of beer to spit it in his face to wake him back up. It was humiliating, sure, but it felt like a rite of passage. I'd seen Animal House. I thought I knew what I was in for. Gross I could handle. I grew up on a farm, after all. My best friend in the pledge class was Tommy. He was from Mobile, a lanky kid with a quick laugh and a knack for diffusing tension. We bonded the first weekend when we both got stuck cleaning the frat house kitchen after a party, scrubbing vomit off the linoleum while the brothers laughed and threw bottle caps at us. Tommy was the kind of guy who'd crack a joke about it, make it bearable. "We're basically Cinderella, man," he'd say, grinning. "Just waiting for our fairy godmother to show up with a cup for the keg." Tommy was pre-med as well, so we got into a good habit of studying together at the libraries before lineups. He was poor too, but he never asked for anything. "I'm just happy to be doing this, man. It's like a movie." Our pledge educator, a fancy title for the brother in charge of training us on how to be brothers, was a senior named Kurt, a larger-than-life guy who loved chain-smoking cigarettes and playing darts. Most of the information we learned seemed important at the time. What year did DKE arrive on campus? Who were our founding fathers? But in reality, no one really remembered this shit after graduation. What I remembered most about Kurt was the time incident. See, midway into the process, 2 pledges get selected to show up to the house after a lineup, the smartest and the best drinker. This is right after the pledge gets fired for us not learning fast enough, something dramatized and something that happens for every single pledge class, regardless of how well they're doing with retaining dumb dates and facts. Tommy and I were the ones selected here. Tommy was the better drinker. I'd been doing the best on the weekly tests at lineup. And they immediately spouted out a super long quote to us and then asked us what time it was. If we couldn't recite the quote back perfectly, we took a shot of Jameson from a nearly full handle in front of us. The quote itself was challenging, but the hard part was trying to memorize it before the alcohol hit our systems. Tommy got it surprisingly fast, in a little under 10 tries, while I hadn't even gotten through the first half. You can leave now, Tommy. I know you've got class tomorrow, or you can stay here, and every time you go, that's another chance for Chuck to hear the full quote, Kurt said with a dark gaze to his eyes. I reckon I'll stay then, Tommy said solemnly, giving me a knowing glance before rattling off the quote once more. I got close for whatever that was worth. But as the alcohol sunk in, both of us became sloppier and sloppier until eventually that handle was gone. 2 of us had drank it, and it was gone. No one ever fucks it up this bad. Kurt seemed furious as he reached for another handle to put up on the table. Thankfully, the other brothers stopped him, but I could see in his eyes this was genuine anger. I don't remember much of the rest of the night, but I'm grateful I survived. Tommy and I were quick to pull trigger after we left the event and fell asleep in his dorm, puking into buckets and regretting the full day of classes to come. The hazing got worse as the weeks went on. They'd wake us up at random hours, make us run laps around the house in our underwear at sunrise, force us to recite the Greek alphabet while they dumped ice water on us. I nearly dropped out when during one event one of the brothers announced loudly he was going to piss on us. Take your pick, pledges. It only has to be one of you. Our pledge class president, a position of unwanted responsibility more than anything to be proud of, was a kid named Marty from Los Angeles, a lean dude with an unbreakable smile, and he quickly turned to scan over our ranks before pointing his finger at me. You never have to do any of the hard stuff, Chuck. Others started to agree, only for Tommy to jump into my rescue right as I found myself preparing to walk. Chuck's got a girl waiting on him later. I'll do it, I don't care. It all washes off, right? I loved Tommy in that moment, but I didn't fully comprehend the sacrifice he'd made. He'd shown he was willing to put his neck on the line for us, and no one was going to forget that. The next night for lineup, they lined us up in the basement and made us sing some of the old DKE drinking anthems while holding lit candles in a human pyramid while in our underwear. If you messed up a word, they'd take the candle from your hand, press the hot wax onto your arm. At one point, after fucking up twice in a row, one of the drunker brothers grabbed my arm with a grin and stared me in the eyes as he burnt into my skin. A tiger needs its color, right, Stripes? I still have a scar on my wrist from that night. Tommy got it worse because he flinched when they pressed the wax and they kept doubling the time as punishment. He didn't complain, though. He just winked at me afterward like it was all part of the game. By the time Hell Week rolled around, we were exhausted. The brothers had us running on no sleep, chugging liquor until we puked and doing trust exercises that felt more like psychological torture. It started off with just loops of the same annoying song on over and over during lineups or events, which was annoying. But at least it was funny to riff about after. But as time went on, shit got darker. One night they locked us in a room with no lights and played recordings of people screaming while making us stand in a circle. They told us to confess our worst fears while they mocked us, each pledge getting his own personal taste of torture. I admitted I was scared of ending up alone, a nobody. Tommy said he was afraid of drowning, which got a big laugh from the brothers. "Good to know, pledge," one of them shouted, bumping an elbow playfully into Kurt's side, and I saw a glint in their eyes that made my stomach twist. Hell Week was held at an old plantation house the fraternity owned, about an hour outside Tuscaloosa, not officially registered to the fraternity through any university channels. It was a crumbling relic, surrounded by overgrown fields and a murky creek that smelled like decay. The brothers called it the Lodge, and it was where DKE's initiation rituals had been held for decades. We arrived in a convoy of nondescript cars and beat-up trucks, the 20 of us pledges crammed into the back of 3 of them like cattle. The brothers were different out there, less rowdy, more focused. I thought I saw an older guy who'd always been kind of nice get into an argument early on with our ex-pledge Ed Kurt, and I could have sworn he was actually crying. But that seemed crazy. We were just pledges to them. What was he worried about? Still, something had shifted in the process now. They didn't joke as much, and their eyes had this intensity that made me feel like I was being watched, judged. The first night at the lodge was brutal. They split us into groups and made us compete in these sadistic games, carrying buckets of rocks across the field blindfolded while they tripped us or sprayed us with hoses. If your group lost, you'd get penalties, which meant more drinking or running until you collapsed. When 2 teams were eliminated, they had to each pick a member to take a hit in the balls from Kurt, who for the course of Hell Week had retitled himself Haze Master General. Tommy and I were in the same group, and we kept each other going. He'd whisper stupid jokes when the brothers weren't looking, and I'd help him up when he stumbled. We were a team, you know. I thought we'd make it through together. They had us staying in a large closet, more or less, with a table set up in the center meant to take up as much space as possible, and 18 chairs placed around it just tight enough to ensure no one could find the space to lay down. We were allowed to do schoolwork and study fraternity information, but nothing else. No going back to our dorms, no going out for food, and even conversations were frowned upon, forcing us to resort to hushed whispers over the sound of a constantly blasting song. The End by The Doors, that we usually got away with. I learned down the line that newly initiated brothers from the year before were supposed to be finding excuses to sneak in to bring us food throughout the week. But the guys we had were either lazy or hated us. I think at one point we got a bag of chips. For our real dinners, brothers visited local foreign food markets, combining the grossest range of things they could find, ranging from clam juice to sheep stomach and even deep-fried insects, though it was better than drinking on an empty stomach. I tried to keep my spirits up by focusing on classwork. Tommy and I had our lab final the next week, and at least we could study together. The second night was a little scarier. Brothers set up a light bulb in one of the darker corners of the room and would call us in one by one in our underwear, forcing our heads up as our eyes strained against the light, and they'd force us to try to read off the small text on its underside before running us through a bunch of random fraternity knowledge-related questions. When we were wrong, we took a large bite from an onion on our necks, reciting a dumb, simple quote, "I'm always wrong, I'm never right, in fact, I'll take another bite, sirs." Marty was allergic to onions, so they had him do ghost peppers instead. I could see him growing more and more red, though his stomach was so empty and raw that he couldn't manage to puke up anything. Just a lot of painful, dry heaving and retching. Tommy managed to find the silver lining, though. "They thought they were gonna starve us, huh? I fucking love onions." The third night was the scariest night I'd experienced so far. Kurt, or Haze Master General, as he'd been insisting we call him, assigned each pledge someone to go under the light with, whom he referred to as our Thunder Buddy, where both parties needed to know each question. The quizzes got a lot more difficult, and so did the screaming. And they'd purposefully paired people who'd been good at retaining the information with people who weren't in order to ensure fuck-ups all throughout the night. Tommy was my Thunder Buddy, luckily, and we did all right. Others, not so much. Marty and his Thunder Buddy, a kid from Florida named Sam, spent nearly 2 hours straight in there towards the tail end of the night, coming back to our room well past sunrise. Sam was speechless, shaking as pale as a ghost in the corner, and Tommy skipped over a few seats to check in with him. "You don't have to finish this, man. None of us are gonna stop being your friends. These guys can't actually stop you from just walking out of here, dude. If it's bothering you, just like..." A sense of recognition seemed to hit Sam's face, as if he realized for the first time all week this was still possible. "Leave." Marty immediately tried to jump in for damage control, but once the idea was seeded in his head, Sam was already packing his bags. The room was silent enough to hear a needle drop other than Tommy, who kept quietly encouraging Sam despite Marty's attempts to sway him. We'd had a couple of kids drop out by this point, but walking out the door with less than a week left was practically unheard of. Still, Sam had never been as into it as others. He was a legacy, which meant he got an automatic bid because of someone in his family. And frankly, I was shocked he'd made it this far. He was way too soft for some of the shit these guys threw at us. As he forced his way through the brother standing guard at the door, who seemed shocked but made no efforts to stop him, Marty stood from his seat by the door and brazenly tried to shove a finger into his face for one last plea. You can't just abandon your Thunder Buddy. Do you know what they're going to do to me?" The next morning we found out. By the time the fourth night rolled around, Marty was on the verge of collapse, pale as paper, shaking consistently and covered in bruises far beyond child's play. He literally couldn't speak after, but we'd find out later via a handheld camcorder that he'd been singled out for the Gauntlet of Truth, a ritual where he had to recite the fraternity's history flawlessly. Each misstep, be it a stammered date or a forgotten founder's name, brought a swift punishing blow, either with a paddle or a fist. One senior, his breath heavy with whiskey, landed a stinging backhand across Ethan's cheek when he fumbled the founding year, splitting his lip and knocking out one of his canines in the process. Another brother's paddle thudded into Marty's shin when he missed a Greek letter in the chant, the bone visibly warped through the skin of his scrawny legs come line-up that night. A drunken senior describing his knees buckling, but that he was yanked upright by his hair, forced to continue as sweat and blood mingled together, dripping onto the floor whilst he crossed the finish line. The brothers' jeers grew louder, their eyes gleaming with a mix of sadistic glee and tradition-fueled fervor as Marty's voice cracked but persisted into a weak semblance of victory when he crossed the line. Brotherhood, the hazing that followed, was by all intents and purposes kind of fun. Questions shifted from fraternity knowledge to sillier things like, which brother gets the most girls? I found myself holding a beer while lined up in the hallway at one point, even cracking a smile as Marty managed to pull off a shotgun despite his hobbled circumstances. Tommy at one point wrapped an arm around my shoulder and pulled me close, the optimism in his voice sending shivers up my spine. Tonight could be the night, man. Tonight we might be done. We weren't. On the fifth night, things changed for the worst. They gathered us in the basement of the lodge, a damp, stone-walled room lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with mildew, and there was this faint metallic smell I couldn't quite place. The brothers were all there, wearing these creepy black robes with hoods like something out of a bad horror movie. The chapter president, a senior named Garrett, stepped forward. He was a big guy, pre-law, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Tonight," he said, "we separate the men from the boys. DKE isn't just a fraternity. It's a brotherhood forged in sacrifice. If you want to be one of us, you have to prove you're willing to pay the price. I thought he meant more hazing, maybe something worse than before. I was wrong. They handed each of us a knife, small, sharp, with a bone handle carved with the DKE crest. Garrett explained the ritual. The lodge demands loyalty, he said. It demands blood. Every pledge class gives something to keep the balance. Those who give the most are rewarded. Those who don't, well, they don't belong. He gestured to the floor, and I noticed for the first time that there were stains on the stone, dark, uneven patches that looked too much like dried blood. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just theatrics. Frats did weird stuff, right? Secret handshakes, creepy rituals, it was all part of the mystique. But then Garrett called out 5 names, including Tommy's. They had each been selected by Cabinet for some slight, a wrong answer, an unwarranted chuckle, or maybe even because they just looked at someone the wrong way. The chosen pledges were led to the center of the room, and the rest of us were told to stand against the walls. The brothers started chanting in a language I didn't recognize, low and guttural, like a prayer to something ancient. Tommy looked at me, his eyes wide, and I saw real fear there for the first time. They blindfolded the 5 pledges and tied their hands behind their backs. Garrett said, "The lodge has chosen. To join us, you must offer a sacrifice. One of these 5 will pay the price tonight. The rest of you will decide who." My stomach dropped. This wasn't hazing. This was something else, something wrong. I wanted to run, to grab Tommy and get the hell out, but the brothers were watching us, their knives glinting in the dim light. They gave us a choice. Pick one of the 5 to die, or the ritual would claim more. "The lodge always gets its due," Garrett said. "If you don't choose, it chooses for you." The other pledges were panicking, whispering, trying to figure out what to do. Some guy, a scrawny kid named Ryan, started crying and saying he didn't sign up for this. A brother slapped him hard and told him to shut up. I looked at Tommy blindfolded and kneeling in the center of the room. I wanted to save him, I swear I did. But I was scared. Scared of dying. Scared of losing everything I'd worked for. DKE wasn't just a frat. It was a ticket to a better life. Garrett had told us stories about alumni who were CEOs, senators, guys who ran the world because of the connections they'd made here. I wanted that. I needed it. The pledges started arguing, throwing out names. Some said Ryan because he was weak, always whining. Others pointed at a guy named Chris who'd mouthed off to the brothers one too many times. But a few kept looking at Tommy, saying he was too soft, too much of a joker. I tried to defend him, but my voice was shaking and nobody listened. The brothers didn't care who we picked. They just wanted it done. In the end, we voted. It was anonymous, scraps of paper dropped into a box. I wrote Ryan's name, I swear I did. But when Garrett counted the votes, Tommy's name came up the most. I don't know if it was rigged or if the other pledges really turned on him. Maybe I should have fought harder, screamed, done something. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, as they untied Tommy and led him to a stone altar at the far end of the basement. The chanting got louder, and Garrett raised his knife. Tommy was sobbing now, begging, saying he didn't want to die. I couldn't look at him, couldn't face the betrayal in his eyes. The brothers told us this was the final test. If we wanted to be DKE, we had to participate. They handed me the knife and told me to make the first cut. "You're his thunder, buddy." And I did. My true fucking stripes finally showed. I fucking did it, okay? It's hard to find the words to describe it, but I felt like I was outside my body watching someone else move my hand. I told myself it was just a test, that they'd stop it at the last second. But they didn't. I won't describe what happened next. I can't. The sounds, the smells, the way the room seemed to pulse with something alive and hungry, it's all burned into my brain. When it was over, Tommy was gone and the brothers were clapping, saying we'd finally proven ourselves. They told us the lodge was pleased, that we'd secured our futures. Jobs, money, power, it was all ours now, sealed in blood. The end of Hell Week was a blur. They burned Tommy's clothes in a bonfire and swore us to secrecy. The lodge protects its own, Garrett said, but it punishes traitors. I didn't sleep for days seeing Tommy's face every time I closed my eyes. I thought about running, going to the cops, but what could I say? Who'd believe me? DKE had alumni everywhere, cops, judges, politicians. I'd seen the photos on the walls of the lodge, generations of brothers smiling like they knew they were untouchable. I stayed. I became a brother. They gave me a pin, a handshake, a place at the table. The other pledges who made it through never talked about that night, but I saw it in their eyes, the same guilt, the same fear. We were bound by what we'd done, and there was no going back. Now I'm 47 with a corner office at a law firm in Birmingham. I've got a wife, 2 kids, a house with a pool. I'm living the American dream just like Garrett promised. But every year when the leaves turn and the air gets crisp, I think about Tommy. I think about the choice I made, the knife in my hand, the blood on the stone. I wonder if I could have saved him, if I could have run and never looked back. But I didn't. I chose this life and I paid the price. So did Tommy. And the worst part? If I had to do it again, I'm not sure I'd choose any different. Brotherhood, man.